Christmas dinner was already loud when my sister stood up, smiled, and pointed at me. "This," she said, "is the failure of our family. Lazy and aimless." My parents laughed like I was some kind of stranger. I really felt embarrassed but stayed silent. So did her boyfriend, until he smiled and changed everything with one sentence. The first thing I noticed was how the laughter paused. Not stopped, paused. Like a record skipping for half a second before resuming its noise. Forks hovered above plates. Someone cleared their throat. My sister's hand tightened around her boyfriend's arm as she angled him toward me, already smiling in that way she'd perfected since childhood. Sweet on the surface. Sharp underneath. Christmas lights reflected in the window behind her, blinking red and gold like they were cheering her on. "This," she said, tilting her head toward me, "is Ella. The disappointment of our family. Still floating. Still finding herself." My parents laughed immediately, relieved laughter, the kind that says thank you for saying what we were all thinking. I stayed seated. I always did. Her boyfriend didn't laugh. He didn't look confused either. He studied the table for a moment, then me, then my parents, like he was mentally rearranging the room. "Interesting," he said quietly. Everyone leaned in without realizing they had. "But she's not the one whose time here is over." That was the moment the air changed. My name is Ella Monroe, and for most of my life, I've existed just outside the frame of my own family. Close enough to be useful, far enough to be ignored. Growing up, our house was never loud in the joyful way. It was orderly. Performative. My sister, Brooke, occupied the center of it like gravity itself bent toward her. Teachers asked about her first. Relatives praised her before saying hello. My parents, Thomas and Linda, spoke about her future the way people talk about investments they're proud of. I learned early how not to take up space. I walked softly. I stacked dishes precisely. I learned which floorboards creaked and which didn't. I learned to finish my homework before Brooke needed help so I wouldn't inconvenience anyone. At dinner, Brooke's plate was always full. Mine was sufficient. If food ran low, I was told I was old enough to understand sacrifices. Brooke, apparently, was not. "Be grateful," my mother would say without looking at me. "Some kids don't even have this." Gratitude became my personality. My father only noticed me when something went wrong, when the internet stopped working, when a bill needed explaining, when Brooke forgot to do something and someone had to take responsibility. "Why didn't you remind her?" he'd ask me, irritation already loaded in his voice. I never asked why she didn't remember herself. Brooke grew up praised for effort. I grew up praised for endurance. When she joined clubs, my parents drove her across town without complaint. When I asked about a weekend writing workshop in high school, my mother sighed and said, "Let's be realistic, Ella. You don't want to spread yourself thin." I stopped asking after that. By the time we were adults, the roles had hardened. Brooke was the one with ambition. I was the one still figuring things out, no matter how many quiet accomplishments I stacked behind the scenes. We both ended up at the same consulting firm downtown, Hawthorne Group. Brooke told people she'd helped me get in. The truth was messier. I worked late. I stayed invisible. I fixed problems before anyone noticed them. Brooke shined in meetings, spoke confidently about projects she barely understood, and somehow, leadership listened. At first, I thought I was imagining things. A proposal idea of mine reappearing under her name. A client praising her approach that sounded suspiciously like my notes. I told myself it was collaboration. Family helps family, right? Then one afternoon, I heard her laughing in the kitchenette. "My sister," she said loudly. "She's not built for pressure. Sweet, but she fades. I'm the closer." People laughed politely. I stood in the hallway, my badge still clipped to my coat, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that came from knowing the story about me had already been written without my input. The next morning, my project folder was gone. Not moved. Gone. In its place was a new deck, cleaned up, polished, signed with Brooke's initials. I didn't cry. I opened the system logs. Sometimes, clarity arrives quietly. In timestamps. In usernames. In actions that can't explain themselves away. There it was. Her access. Her download. Her deletion. Her upload. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because I didn't understand it, but because some part of me had still hoped I was wrong. A junior analyst stopped by my desk later, eyes darting. I thought you should know, she whispered. I saw Brooke pull your file last night. She told me you were overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. The word followed me all day like an insult wrapped in concern. That night, I didn't go home. I walked. Past the glowing storefronts, past the couples carrying wrapped gifts, until the city thinned into something quieter. I went to a shared workspace I used to freelance from years ago, back when my career wasn't something Brooke could narrate for me. The lights buzzed softly. The place smelled like old coffee and printer ink. I logged in and started saving everything. Logs. Files. Emails. Budget approvals she'd signed without authority. Notes she'd sent leadership suggesting I step back, for my own well-being. I wasn't angry. I was precise. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from my aunt in Ohio. I found something while cleaning out your grandmother's old filing cabinet, she wrote. Your college fund paperwork. It was supposed to go to you. Attached were scanned documents. Accounts. Transfers. Withdrawals. Money that had quietly vanished the same way my opportunities had. I added them to the folder. I named it simply, Records. By morning, I knew something Brooke didn't. Silence had protected her for years. But systems remember everything. The meeting with Daniel happened the next morning, earlier than I expected. He didn't text first. He didn't soften it. My calendar simply updated overnight. Conference room C, 8 a.m. No subject line. No explanation. Just his name. Daniel Brooks wasn't just Brooks' boyfriend. He was a senior partner at Hawthorne. That fact had always been carefully omitted at family gatherings. Brooke preferred her version of the story, the one where she was impressive on her own, where her success bloomed naturally, without proximity or leverage. Saying who Daniel really was would have complicated the mythology she'd spent years constructing. I arrived 5 minutes early. The hallway was quiet, still waking up. Cleaning staff moved carts down the corridor. Coffee machines hummed to life. The office had that muted anticipatory stillness it always carried before the performances began. Daniel closed the door behind us gently, like he didn't want to startle anything fragile. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he turned his laptop toward me and rotated the screen. Your work, he said after a moment, voice low. It's everywhere. Campaigns. Client decks. Strategy outlines. Visual language guides. Threads I recognized instantly, because I'd built them, often late at night, often quietly, often without credit. I nodded once. You didn't come to me, he said, not accusing. Observing. I didn't think you'd listen, I replied. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't self-pity. Just a statement of fact shaped by years of evidence. He studied me then, not the way people look when they're trying to decide who's right, but the way they look when they're recalibrating something they thought they understood. You ready for this to stop? He asked. Yes. That was all I said. No speeches. No emotional appeal. No rehearsed justification. Just yes. And that, apparently, was enough. HR moved faster than Brooke ever expected them to. Legal moved with a precision my parents had never shown when it came to protecting me. Documents were reviewed. Logs verified. Timelines aligned. Patterns confirmed. I wasn't asked to confront her. I wasn't asked to explain myself again. For the first time, the burden of proof didn't sit on my shoulders. I didn't deliver the news. I didn't need to. But Christmas dinner, that was unavoidable. Family traditions have a way of dragging you back into rooms you've already outgrown. I arrived late on purpose. Not to make a statement, but to avoid being woven into the opening performance. When I stepped inside my parents' house, the noise was already thick. Laughter bounced off the walls. The smell of roasted meat, cinnamon, and artificial pine hung in the air, heavy and nostalgic in a way that felt rehearsed. Brooke was mid-story when I entered, holding court near the dining table. Her hands moved as she spoke, painting success into the air. Relatives leaned in, nodding, smiling, feeding the familiar rhythm. Daniel stood beside her. Polite. Distant. His posture was different than usual. Not affectionate. Not performative. Just present. My father noticed me eventually and gestured toward the far end of the table. Sit, he said. We're eating. The tone carried the same old message. Don't disrupt the image. My mother's eyes flicked over me. Coat, shoes, hair, as if scanning for something to correct. Try not to make a scene, she murmured. I didn't respond. I took the seat I'd always taken, the one just outside the circle of attention. Dinner resumed. And then, inevitably, Brooke stood. She always did. She pressed her hand lightly against Daniel's arm, the way she did when she wanted the room to focus. The conversations tapered. Forks slowed. Heads turned. I should introduce my sister properly, she said, smiling. Some of you don't see her often. She paused, just long enough. Ella's, still finding her direction. The words were familiar, worn smooth from repetition. The laughter followed automatically, like muscle memory. Something in me loosened. Daniel set his fork down. Not sharply. Not dramatically. Softly. The sound was small, but it cut through the room better than shouting ever could. Conversations stalled mid-breath. Interesting, he said calmly. Then he looked at my parents. But she's not the one losing her position tonight. The silence that followed was different from any I'd known in that house. Not dismissive. Not awkward. Alert. He reached for his tablet and connected it to the television. The screen lit up, washing the room in pale light. Files appeared. Logs. Timestamps. Metadata. Proof doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. Brooke's smile faltered as her name appeared again and again. Accessing, downloading, deleting, re-uploading. Her color drained slowly, as if reality was sinking in layer by layer. I didn't, she started. Daniel didn't look at her. Effective immediately, he said, voice even. Your employment with Hawthorne Group is terminated. He paused. So is our relationship. No yelling. No pleading. No dramatics. Just truth, finally placed where everyone could see it. My father leaned back in his chair, confusion hardening into something like fear. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it, as if realizing there was no line prepared for this version of events. No one looked at me. They didn't know how. I stayed seated, hands folded loosely in my lap. My heart was steady, not racing, not triumphant. Just calm. For the first time, my silence didn't feel like erasure. It felt like authority. The aftermath didn't explode. It unraveled. Brooke left the table first, chair scraping loudly against the floor. A door slammed somewhere down the hall. My parents sat frozen, unsure whether to follow her or address the wreckage she'd left behind. No one apologized. I didn't wait for them to. I left quietly, the same way I always had, but this time, I didn't feel smaller as I stepped outside. I moved to Portland 3 months later. Not to escape, but to begin without narrators. The apartment was small. Clean. Mine. Gray light filtered through the windows most mornings. Rain tapped softly against the glass like it was checking in, not demanding anything. I bought one plant and placed it near the window. It thrived without supervision. I liked that. Work followed me. Not because of pity, because of reputation. My real one. Clients remembered who actually built their strategies. Colleagues listened when I spoke. My ideas stayed attached to my name. I didn't cut my family off. I just stopped explaining myself. When my mother called, I answered politely. When my father asked how work was going, I kept it brief. I didn't volunteer details. I didn't soften truths. I didn't fill silences they created. Distance did what arguments never could. On Christmas Eve, a year later, I cooked dinner in my apartment. Nothing extravagant. Just food I liked, prepared the way I liked it. Friends gathered, people who knew me without comparison, without context, without needing a foil. I plated the food and served myself first. No one commented. No one laughed. No one corrected me. Later, after the dishes were done and the night settled into quiet, I sat alone at the table for a moment, letting the stillness land. I used to think survival meant staying quiet long enough for someone to finally see me. Now I understand silence differently. It isn't emptiness. It's space. A door I choose when to open. And for the first time in my life, the room answered back. Moral lessons. This story is a reminder that silence is not the same as weakness, and being underestimated does not mean being unworthy. Sometimes the people who label you lazy or aimless are the same ones benefiting from your patience, your work, and your restraint. You don't owe everyone an explanation, especially those committed to misunderstanding you. Truth has a way of surfacing when it's documented, steady, and undeniable. Protect your work, trust what you know about yourself, and don't rush to prove your value to people who only applaud when you fail. Growth doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like leaving quietly, choosing yourself, and building a life where your worth no longer needs defending.